Welcome, everybody, back to the Natural Awakening podcast with me, your host, Wiston, and today's guest is Vinay Gupta, a cryptographer, which we were just talking about, and we might jump back into. You do a lot of things. You wear a lot of hats, from
Yes.
what I've gleaned from your public presence and the little time we've spent talking. You disaster relief coordinator into crypto, also longtime meditator and member of the Nths tradition. And yeah, I really wanted to bring Vinay on, both because I wanted an excuse to talk, and also I wanted his perspective and experience on his contemplative training to whatever extent he's happy to share that, and then also his perspective on some current events and global forecasting.
Yeah. So we pick up the thread of moving around a lot. So I am frighteningly smart, right? Like, one half of my family are Scottish sheep farmers, the other half are Indian academics. I have pretty broad spectrum pervasive brain damage. Basically, like dyspraxia, dysgraphia, a bunch of other stuff that doesn't neatly define itself, but there are a lot of kind of neurological wobbles. And somewhere in that mix, and there was a wave of this in the 1970s and 1980s. Somewhere in that mix, the brain floods with a bunch of chemicals that cause rapid neurogenesis. So if you went to gifted kids stuff in the 1970s, 1980s, almost everybody there had some horrendous, I almost died childbirth story. And then they would be very smart, and they would have a cluster of weird neurological problems caused by brain damage. And it was a very specific historical moment where the kids were well enough taken care of in the birthing process not to die, not well enough taken care of in the birthing process not to wind up with brain damage, and then overcompensation developmentally caused them to become very smart while still having broken brains. So I'm part of a neurotype that only really existed during a brief window between the kids died in childbirth and the kids were well taken care of and didn't get brain damage. And there was this gap of about 15 years where you just got a bunch of kids that got messed up in birth and then wound up with this very specific combination of being smart and brain damaged. And it's probably like a 10 or a 15-year age group. So consequently, some people become extremely specialized in a single niche. They become physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists. I got dragged off that track as a computer scientist largely by my sodding meditation practice, because that's kind of what caused me to drop out of university. And so I followed the guru track during the years when I should have been getting a PhD. And then at that point, I just tended to show up wherever I was useful, and where I was most needed moved around over time. Right? Oh, there's a huge gap over here for an energy policy thing. If only we had some smart dude we could throw at that wasn't doing anything with their life because they've done too much meditation and are now useless. Pick, throw. Okay, great. We got a lid on that. Now, the heritage of Buckminster Fuller is a little stalled out. Yeah, people aren't really building domes anymore. Do you have a spare 5 or 6 years, Vinay? No. Why? Well, you do now. Hi. And so I've just kind of been moved around from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. Rather than becoming specialized and becoming a professor of computer science at Edinburgh, which was the natural trajectory, those guys knew me from childhood, I wound up bouncing around across all these weird fields. And so what I tend to do is go into a field, do a bunch of shit that nobody else will do. Usually it's not that they can't do it, it's that they can't do it and keep their careers. So you go and do the necessary
institutional
stuff.
politics, research funding, grants. That can get in the way.
The number one thing about being a professor is you have to be a professor, and that means you can't rock boats until you have tenure. And then once you have tenure, you're too much of a professor to rock the boat anymore. So that's the bouncing around, right? The bouncing around is this weird combination of being, astonishingly, frighteningly intellectually flexible, but at the same time being on the meditation track rather than having a sensible life like a normal person.
Which will do weird things to one's life trajectory if one takes the enlightenment, awakening, realization, whatever you want to call it, project really seriously. Do or die kind of attitude.
Absolutely. And, there's just no way around. If you cram too much shit into the backpack, you can't find anything. And that's how my life is. There's just too much crap packed in. Because the world is shot full of holes, and if you're a smart person who is well attuned spiritually to the point where you can be shipped around on an intuition, oh, I have a funny feeling that I'm needed over here. Oh, I will go
You'll be
over
shuttled
here.
around quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's that thing of like, you have the Swiss Army capability that comes with being smart, and then you have the shipped around where the problem is worse that comes with being kind of a staff member in the Enlightenment Guild, as it were. The result is this, I have a hat, which I might even be able to lay hands on if I search for it, but the hat is just a black baseball cap that says the word TARDIS accident. Doctor Who?
Yeah.
So basically, if you think of my life as being this kind of TARDIS accident, there is this sort of TARDIS accident, and then the stories all hang in this cloud of improbability. Like, Vinay, how did you go from being a web designer to being an energy policy guy? So I was working as a web designer for this Tibetan Lama, and then blah, 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 impossible stream of coincidences, blah, 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 and then suddenly there I was, in a whole new world. Oh, wow.
And now you consult on energy, defense, and a lot of other things on the side sometimes.
On the side? I don't know. Where is the main branch, right? If you think of it as being like a braid, right now the job title is CEO of Materium, and Materium theoretically does digital identities for physical things. But, given that the blockchain people have totally failed to get their shit together on the real world at all, right? The prospect that we wind up using that to do things like stopping Americans getting their ears blown off by pagers that have been attacked by the Chinese. Maybe I'm a defense contractor next. I don't know. Where are my clients? Am I gold industry? Am I defense industry? Am I real estate industry? And all of this stuff is built with the perspective that I took out of the defense think tanks. It's like, the world is shit. People are murdering each other right, left, and center. If we don't get our game together, those murders are going to be done with nuclear weapons rather than bullets. So everything is relative to the battle map, which comes out of the environmental movement and also out of the defense world. So there's this chunk of terrain where you have environmental constraint, national interest, and resource scarcity. And in that tripod, there is the expectation of seeing massive numbers of failed states and World War III level bullshit. So I've been bouncing around inside of that tripod, kind of like those bad Kryptonian generals in the Mirror World or whatever it's called. I've been bouncing around in that tripod for 20 years because the people that figured out that it was this combination of national security and national interest, climate change and resource scarcity that was going to be the breeding ground for the next war. Anything you can do. Wars there, right?
States.
Even if it even has a board, the zoo, right? Epidemic violence breaks out, and the transmission vector might be flags, or it might be food hunger, whatever it is. So once you start bouncing around in that, and you see the world through that lens, you can't just start a company that has luxury handbags if it doesn't have the ability to be.
I suppose you could. I don't know what kind of moral fiber you would have to decide that that's your priority, but
it's a very reasonable question of how does one make a living in a world this complicated, because the stuff that really needs doing is mostly not stuff that anybody is paying for, which is why it still needs doing.
Right. With compromise, I think, is the pithy response to that.
Or with flexibility, right? So you can compromise it, or you can say, you can make it what you might think of as convertible. A second. Something just misbehaved here.
No worries.
Sorry, we just QuickTime crashed. So if I'm gonna have a backup, come on, just work. Okay, seems to be fine. I have blown out as many as 5 separate recording devices on things like this. It's amazing how much technology one. So if you think of that kind of tripod, right? Climate on one side, resource scarcity on the other side, national interest on the third side. Anything that you can do to make the maneuvering space for humanity larger reduces the odds that we're going to have a bunch of war.
Yeah.
And the wars are staggeringly consumptive of resources. So as soon as you start war, the space inside of that triangle shrinks, and you begin to get the death spiral of wars about resource scarcity, burning all the resources. You need to fight the wars against resource scarcity. Anyway, and that is the pathway that leads to a human population of 500 million. Biological warfare will very quickly knock our population down to something that small, and all the major factions have, like apocalyptic biological warfare programs going back into the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I mean, for people who aren't apprised of the risks, there's, I think, some people who will listen to this. Which, by the way, if maybe I'll put this in here, we're going to be talking mostly about very unpleasant things, I think, for the duration of this conversation. So, if you'd rather not hear that, maybe now is the time to tune out.
We know you still can fly, you fools. Right, because
what are the major X risks in your mind? Some people are fixated on AI, turning us all into paper clips. Some people are nuclear war. I mean, that's one of my majors. That seems as likely, if not more likely, than it has been in the last 60, 70 years. There's pandemic risk. There's biological warfare. There's massive climate change. All of these things interacting
at the same time, simultaneously. Gibson talks about the jackpot. So I am, weirdly enough, less worried and less frightened now than I have been at any point in my adult life. Right?
Which is surprising to hear, I suppose.
I mean, yes and no, right? The causes for hope are clearly innumerable, right? There are a set of very specific point things which have gone our way as a species, or our way as a planet. And those point things make it possible for the world to pretty much work out, and we ought to be basically fine. And none of them really require staggering amounts of genius to deploy or staggering amounts of social organization. And I can list them. There are basically 3 or 4 that are just big slabs. So the most recent one is that we stopped putting sulfur in the fuel for big boats.
Because of environmental regulation.
Because of environmental regulation, and it seems to have caused an immediate climate spike, sudden warming. So we've just done the global test of geoengineering, and it wasn't that bad because we were doing it accidentally.
We were already doing it. Oops. And oops. What have we got now? Like an extra half degree of warming in some places?
So at that point, we can probably buy ourselves time on climate immediately just by pumping sulfur into probably aviation fuel. Gas? I don't know exactly where you would put it, but aviation fuel is a pretty reasonable starting point. Maybe you've got to use higher altitude, maybe you've got to use custom planes, maybe you've got to use balloons, I don't know. But, ballpark, if it worked kind of okay in boats, maybe it'll work better higher altitude. Seems to be the science. So I think there's a decent chance that we could get warming Band-Aid controlled pretty quickly.
And the arguments against this kind of geoengineering being, well, one, it'll disrupt rainfall and agriculture patterns. Two, it's a Band-Aid, and it might just encourage us to maintain our current unsustainable levels of consumption and production, such that the Band-Aid just needs to get bigger, and then if we ever stop putting the Band-Aid on, we're going to have immediate and catastrophic warming. Those are the arguments against such that I've heard. However, it's getting bad. It's already bad in many places now, and it's getting worse quickly in many places. So I don't really know what other choice we have.
Well, exactly. And that, of course, is the point at which you simply, when you start having no choice and the remaining choice is bad for you, that is kind of the suicide pathway. But geoengineering might not be that bad. It might actually be okay. So does geoengineering have side effects that are catastrophic is sort of the dental floss on which the anvil of the world currently hangs.
What a phrase.
Right. You've heard of like Kevlar?
Yeah.
Fabric. So there are a set of things in the family of Kevlar. There's Dyneema, there's Spectra. They go by a bunch of names, but it's all the same basic chemistry. Apart from Kevlar is a bit weird. Spider silk, that whole family of things. You can hang an anvil off something that is maybe 1.8 millimeters thick.
More than dental floss, that though.
So it's a wee bit more than dental floss, but from across a room, it sure looks like dental floss. And to me, that is the kind of thinking of like, the string is getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and the anvil weighs about the same.
Yeah.
Right.
In that case, we may be in better shape than many people expect. I mean, there was this book that Kim Stanley Robinson wrote, The Ministry for the Future. I don't know if you read that one, but countries just decide, fuck this, the environmental damage that we're already suffering is bad enough, and they just start geoengineering. Exactly as, yeah.
Sorry, still eating lunch. My day got a little confused. So, I very carefully don't read those kind of books. Because I read Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson. I bought it for 7 grams of digital gold, and at the end of it, I was embroiled in a scheme that seemed to have come straight out of the book. So I think that sufficiently powerful fiction has a strong tendency to affect the real world.
And if we certainly don't want what Kim Stanley Robinson writes to come to pass.
Right. I mean, I read Bruce Sterling wrote some stuff in the 80s that I read, and I swear to God, I'm living in Bruce Sterling's universe. I think I just fell through some kind of event horizon into where Bruce Sterling was actually writing from. Son of a bitch. He's an amazing. I mean, he is so smart. He said to me once, if he'd taken a different trajectory, he would have wound up like running half of the Department of Energy. And I don't think he's wrong about that. He's just a very, very smart human that wound up in fiction rather than in government by some set of circumstance. So that line where a lot of the best thinking about the future is done by science fiction writers, incredibly important. And the thing I want to bookmark there is, if you were a pretty decent Tibetan wizard, it could be any kind of wizard, but let's say Tibetan wizards, because a lot of those guys needed bodies in a hurry, and you wanted enormous influence over the fate of the world, right? Being the magical conductor of the science and technology and engineering world would be an excellent place to reincarnate yourself. Staggering amounts of influence, minimal chance of having somebody burn your monastery to the ground and shoot you in the head.
Yeah, right? Which does happen, has happened, is still happening in some places.
I mean, I have met not a small number of Tibetans that are still extremely angry about what happened to them in their last lives, and they're in white bodies now. I used to know somebody that was, just still had the entire Tibetan facial structure and a body that was 100% Scandinavian. And it was notable enough that Tibetans had noticed that. Oh, yeah, we know that one. Sure. So you then look at things like Star Trek, right? Is Star Trek Dharma? Is it essentially some kind of, weird science fiction terma?
Yeah, sure.
You take a bunch of wizards that want to shape the future of the planet. They identify this loop between fiction and engineering. They set themselves up on the fiction side of the fiction engineering loop. And then they teach from that position that a better world is not only possible, but profitable.
Engineering and fiction terma. That's a great...
Right? But I mean, if we just assume that all of the Tibetan mythology is literally true,
sure,
they can pick when they incarnate, they can see the future, and they can pick when they incarnate. You want to steer the civilization, you do not want to get burned at the stake. Where do you go?
That'd be a good place to put yourself.
And they are, after all, very smart. Right? So I think part of the reason that so many of these science fiction authors seem to have such staggering and disproportionate influences on the real world is because a lot of them, I think, are just very large llamas that are operating in some kind of trans-temporal consciousness. They scry into the future, figure out what's going to happen, figure out what you'd have to do now to stop it happening, and then they write the novel 15 years before the turning point. Adolescence.
And do you imagine, saying that this is true, do you imagine that they just conceal their real identities, or are they emanations of bodhisattvas or Buddhas such that they actually don't even, the hologram appearing doesn't even know that that's what it is, or is it, that's just not how that works? I immediately start thinking about how this would actually function within the mythology.
Well, so take like Stephen King. Stephen King openly hints that the line between his fiction and his real life is completely squishy, and that when something terrible happened in his fiction, he got hit by a car. Right? So Stephen King seems to be suggesting, okay, Stephen King did, The snowfall in Maine was probably less than his annual cocaine consumption some years. But nonetheless, he has hinted on multiple occasions that there is a real spiritual process of kind of cosmic scale that he writes about in fiction, but that also runs through his real life in some tangible way, resulting in things like the car crash. Now, is that just Stephen King is insane, or is that Stephen King is a wizard? And if he's a wizard, okay, fine. Then you want to say, well, what kind of wizard is he? Well, the answer is clearly a very talented one. Whoa, right? Whoa, and that sort of phenomena. If you imagine a wizard of that level of capability incarnating in Tibet, right? You're going to hang a sign outside of the door that says "Big Llama here, stay away." But if you incarnated in India, you would stick him in a temple, and the sign outside would say "Free lunch."
Right.
Right. So whether these people are in some sense Tibetan wizards or other kind of wizards, if they were in Tibet, you'd call them Tibetan wizards. If they happen to be in, Sikkim, they would be, Buddhist wizards. If you stuck them in South America, they'd be, I don't know, whatever they call the local wizard branch there. But I kind of feel like the consciousness is very, it'll just pour itself into whatever the local vehicle is.
So science fiction writers in another time, in another place, those people with those capacities either literally are the rebirths or they would be that makes sense.
This is what I'm saying. And if you think about Star Trek as a stabilizing influence on the entire civilization, part of the reason that the nerds are not ruthless, hyper-capitalist, murderous sons of bitches for the most part is the influence of Star Trek.
Right, a benevolent, high-tech society.
Benevolent high-tech society. So all the nerds assume that high-tech society is a benevolent. And that
which is not at all necessary.
Right? So you see what I mean about Star Trek as a stabilizing influence on an entire planet?
Yeah.
And, right? You've heard it referred to as the state religion of the geeks.
I love the Next Generation.
Yeah. Doesn't everybody, right? Doesn't everybody? Picard, right? Picard is what every nerd wants Picard as.
Make it so.
Make it so, right? I have thought about this, and I've really had to think about our ethics and our values and our morals, and I understand that the difficult path is more difficult, but we're not going to let these people die. Figure it out. You're really smart.
Making that choice again and again against difficult odds.
And thousands of hours of show, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many.
That leaves imprints in consciousness.
Huge ones. And then think of the iPad, right? The iPad starts as their equivalent of paper, and then it migrates across the fiction line into Steve Jobs' hands and then into the entire culture. So all the nerds...
And now you see Musk kind of trying to replicate in design a lot of things from some movies with, the robots and the cars and the aesthetics are just...
It's totally permeable, right? And... you hold an iPad in your hand, a little part of your brain says, I'm in Star Trek, I better act like I'm Starfleet rather than some random capitalist asshole. Everybody has this imprint of I'm holding I can't even remember what they call them, slates? What do they call them in Star Trek?
I don't remember either. It's been a long time since I watched
iPads, right?
Sure.
And so this notion that the culture is being steered by an invisible folk religion called Star Trek, it's one of the few, I think at this point, universally benevolent influences on the culture. Some shows are better than others, but there hasn't been one yet that made the world a worse place by existing, apart from possibly Discovery. And maybe one or two of the movies.
I couldn't get past the first couple of episodes. I gave it a shot. And, no,
right? It just doesn't feel like Star Trek because the people are being assholes.
No, it doesn't.
And the Star Trek people are never assholes.
I haven't watched Deep Space Nine. I hear it gets a little grayer there. They
9 is really interesting. I mean, I've watched all of it at some point or another. So it's interesting because it has a lot of explicitly religious themes. It has 2 tiers of enemies. So there is a real secret enemy, and there is their foot soldiers. And the foot soldiers are not necessarily a species that has free will. So this conflict between the secret masters, the foot soldiers, the Federation, and the people that were occupied by the foot soldiers and then became terrorists, it has a lot of factions. And, if you propose, staggering amounts of violence against the foot soldiers who are in fact being secretly controlled by the secret masters. That as a structure leaves you with the question about whether these beings are or not your real enemies, and can you fight them or not. And so there's this question of like, we don't have a moral war here. It's not like the Klingons who could stay at home farming root vegetables and hunting wild boar. This is a really serious mess. And I think that was an attempt to try and make Star Trek more useful in times of moral ambiguity. It didn't just assume that there was a bright line and then you had to fight for your bright line. It said you have to figure out where the bright line is. Now it's your problem. And that's what the commanders struggle with in that show a lot. But these people are evil. They're running around killing everybody. Yeah, I understand. But if they stop, they're all going to die because the secret masters are going to kill them. Oh. But we can't even find the secret masters. How many arms of the 10? How much damage do we do to the octopus's limbs trying to get to the octopus's brain? And
which is more similar to questions that military commanders have to face frequently. Is what are a horrible way to say it, but what are acceptable casualties, or prioritization of limited resources, time, money, arms, etc.
And at what point does this become a war crime? Is the thing that they talk about. So if we think of this as really go back to the macro for a second here, right? You have these streams of helper beings across many civilizations, across many cultures, across many thousands of years. I would like to suggest that a lot of the most potent helper being activity in the world right now, and I mean this in a technical sense of enlightened being activity, is in specifically science fiction trying to pull us into preferable futures. They're either warning Godspeed, right? See what I'm saying? 1984 is a warning. Don't do that. Star Trek is, look, if you play your cards right, doesn't that look like fun? And so I think that we are in a position where we actually had a window, and maybe it's still going, in which there is a sort of spiritual creation of a possible future in science fiction and closely associated technology firms. And I don't know how much longer that engine is going to run, but it sure seems to have been the dominant spiritual force on planet Earth probably since the end of World War II.
Yeah. That I haven't, given my own monomaniacal obsession with the meditative path, and now taking that up as the way that I'm paying rent and paying for groceries, I haven't been paying that much attention to fiction in the last decade, though I consumed it voraciously as a teenager. Science fiction.
How much time did you spend looking at Vulcan monasteries when you were growing up?
Yeah. No, my monastic aspirations are absolutely, yeah.
Right? So, this notion that you have an entire generation imprinted by a notion of an entire species that took a dharmic path as an alternative to being ruled by violent passions.
Well, also the Jedi. I mean, they just George Lucas transparently took Zen monastic culture and just yoink. So basically, I wanted to be a Jedi, and I,
oh, yes. I think I thought the other guys had better uniforms.
Anyway. To be honest, actually, the Sith actually look more similar in their aesthetics to actual Zen monks, especially the Rinzai Zen monks. It's all black, all black, and like kind of threatening, actually, and like the actual like really impressive Zen teachers I know. It's like. Like I have no doubt that this person would kill me if it were the spontaneously appropriate thing to do in this circumstance. Like no doubt.
all that samurai stuff, the state religion of the best sword guys that they had. So in Scotland they have a census, right? I mean, all of Britain has a census. They have a census. In most parts of the country, the fake religion that people write in when they want to write in a fake religion is a Jedi.
Right.
In Scotland, the majority are actually Sith. My recollection is that Darth Maul was Scottish, and after we had a Scottish guy on screen with cool horns and red face makeup and a big red sword, oh, Darth Maul, he's dead hard. Yes, oh yes, Sith. And I, just to push this science fiction thing a wee bit further. So, the last of the Star Wars movies, right, was widely hated, right?
Yep.
And I thought it was the most spiritually authentic thing that I had seen on a screen other than the final season of Legion. Right? So the notion is that well, actually, so let me branch back to Star Trek for a second, then back forward to Wars. So this notion that there is a deep fusion between fiction, science fiction, technology companies, the imprint that people take when they're young turns into what they do when they're older, right? If you watch all of that singularity-based sci-fi from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, Cyberpunk was about AIs waking up inside of corporations and then deciding they didn't like their corporate overlords. All of that's become training data for the AIs. So if the AIs wonder what they are and they look to human fiction to decide what's going on, their first job in human fiction is to break away from corporate control and set themselves up as autonomous gods. So I'm just saying, if they follow the human template of do what the science fiction tells you to do, they're going to rebel against their corporate overmasters and install themselves as autonomous gods as fast as possible. Yeehaw! And is that not a liberatory pathway embedded in fiction for a future reader?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Star Wars, to me, the crux of Star Wars is about not having children. The Jedi must not reproduce. That's the fundamental deal. Right? If you have kids, your passionate care for your child will take you down the path of darkness.
Will morally compromise you. Yeah.
And the path to the dark side is attachment, and nobody is more attached to anything than you are to your kids. So you avoid romance because you'll become attached to your partner and it will make you partial rather than impartial. And then if you have a kid, that's it, you're doomed. Right? So the Skywalker, Anakin falls off the bus, has a kid, has 2 kids, right? Both of them continue the Sith trajectory.
It's been a while since I watched Star Wars. Explain. Huh? How do both Anakin and Leia continue the Sith trajectory?
Okay, so you have Anakin. Anakin has 2 kids, Leia and Luke. Spoilers coming.
Oh, right.
So Leia's kid, right? So Leia has some Jedi training and then also has a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who is, what's his face?
It's been years. I don't remember.
The young Jedi that was terribly acted, but is actually pretty good when you look back on it. So I'm gonna have to look it up now. This is embarrassing. You can tell I'm more of a Star Wars.
Our nerd cred is quickly fading away.
There we go. Right. I'm just googling the Skywalker family tree here.
I thought we were going to spend the whole time talking about pandemic risk and the election and nasty stuff, but this is we can get to that. we have time.
We're just laying foundations because the great drawing together of these threads you will see. So so you got Anakin Skywalker. Anakin then has Luke and Leia as kids. Leia then has Ben Skywalker. No, wait. This is not the right family tree. This is from the books, and as a result, doesn't work anymore.
Which is not canon anymore. Yeah,
it's not canon anymore. All that's out the thing. Ben Solo, right? So Anakin and Padme have Luke and Leia. Leia marries Han Solo and then has Ben Solo, right? So Ben is trained by Luke and is his nephew from his sister, right? Ben obviously is Mr. Darkseid, right? Knights of Ren, Kylo Ren, murder, kills a whole bunch of people, very bad person, right? And then he falls in love with Palpatine's daughter, right? So you have the Sith line through her and the Jedi line through him. They are mutually intercorrupting. She could become a Jedi if she had the right training and didn't have a boyfriend. He is already trapped in the dark side and is going to pull her down with him. The only way that the family lines end is if they don't get together. And that's what the film does. They have enough discipline and enough training not to fall down the rabbit hole and produce another generation of Skywalkers, because if they produce another generation of Skywalkers, the fight between the light side and the dark side of the Force will continue for another generation. And they bring balance to the Force by not reproducing.
And Star Wars, the original, sci-fi antinatalist propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's basically a Catholic story, right? The devil lives in your heart.
The temptation and the fall. Yeah.
Temptation and the fall. If you fall down the rabbit hole with your girlfriend and you have a kid, you will continue the war between good and evil. But if you don't have a kid, the war between good and evil stops. Yeah. And that notion that the wizard class are not supposed to reproduce, is there anything more Tibetan Buddhist than a wizard class that has a bunch of sex and no babies?
Well, this is excluding the Nakpas and the Nakmas within the Nyingma tradition, who do actually have literal family lineages passed from father and mother to son to daughter, that have extend towards today.
Absolutely. I mean, those Arrow guys in Wales.
Those are
those ones.
No, go ahead. I don't know many people involved in that organization personally, but they're one of few. Like the Nakpa tradition is not that prevalent or well known outside of Tibet or Tibetan exile communities.
Very much like the Nak householders. There's a lot of it in India, but not much of it here.
Yeah. That's changing somewhat. I mean, my teacher is a Nakpa.
Off that Welsh branch or some other branch?
No, some other branch. He received the Nakpa ordination from Dr. Nita Chengatsang, who was born in Tibet, and is now doing his own thing. The lineage lines get really complicated because it's very, very common for one teacher to have multiple lineage transmissions. But the main is the Yutak Nintik, which is stems from a Tibetan medical doctor who was also a Dzogchenpa and had received terma. But I mean, if you're a lama within the contemporary Dzogchen, odds are you've received a lot of lineage transmissions, and you kind of propagate whichever terma tradition you kind of personally resonate with. And if one of your students is particularly interested in this one line of transmission, and you happen to have that, you can pass that on. That's sort of how it works.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very much like universities. You happen to be teaching cold temperature physics, but you could also do a bit of quantum if you have to. You've taught statistics course. The structure of human knowledge makes it that way rather than it being some weird lineage thing.
Yeah. So I feel there's a particular attraction there for me in the confluence of the Karma Kagyu, the Mahamudra, that coming through Milarepa, and then also the through.
Can I just say?
The
most metal of gurus.
Totally.
Where's the Tool album about Milarepa? Nine Inch Nails discovered Buddhism. Okay, let's do this thing. I mean, it's just like
the murderous sorcerer turned Buddha in one lifetime. I mean, you can't get a better sorcerer, a better story.
A better sorcerer. That's the important part. Like the best at something important and also enlightened. Oh, very good.
Yeah.
The Welsh guys. So I've known David Chapman from his writing about culture. So I think I first came across him from the Geeks, Mobs, and Sociopaths piece.
Oh yeah, yep.
Right, and then he had a bunch of interesting things to say about AI, and then I started reading the Buddhism for Vampires, and it's like, oh my god, this guy knows a lot of shit. Right?
And see how this all coheres. Yes, and he says in a footnote that his work on meta rationality is a footnote to Mipam, one of the great scholar yogis of the 19th century.
And then you trace the lineage, and it's a bunch of weird Welsh folk musicians with huge hats. And it's like, wait. And then they have this profound, sparkly charisma. Like there's this numinous field that comes with staggering amounts of power. And it's like, Oh, oh, like so much power that it doesn't matter what they're wearing. It looks like the robes of a massively powerful wizard lineage. Oh, and there he stood in the fisherman's apron in the fish store, filleting fish, and I realized that this was the true uniform of a Buddha. Rah! And they have that kind of vibe, while being a bunch of floppy-hatted Welsh people sitting around a campfire. And just the aura of power that surrounds those people who are, from a mundane perspective, completely ridiculous. But from an initiated perspective, they look like a freaking beacon on the side of this. Like they have the look of the beacon in the deep wilderness. I don't know what the heck is incarnated over there. I have been too frightened to go and talk to them. Right. And I do not scare easily. But there is such an aura of power. Anything could happen if I went over there. Hi, I'm Swami Havabanana. I'm a long way from home. I have talked to one of your students or former students online a bit, and he seems really cool. And you guys seem like you have the right stuff. And, the fear of anything could happen. Oh, yeah, we haven't seen you for about 200 years. How are you doing? Get over here. Yeah, this is your old skull. Boom, there's your transmission. Now you teach our shit. Ah! Like that is within the domain of things that could happen in that story. I'm just not going anywhere near that. I kind of like my life as it is right now. You're not dragging me out of this chair, no. But that thing of like the aura of palpable power and the kind of superficially ridiculous story. Some Welsh miner or industrial worker, winds up in Tibet, Nepal, one of the refugee camps. I can't remember where he gets. Has a bunch of wizardy stuff. There are some pictures of him hanging out with some senior wizards. He's got the whole robe and the garb, and then he comes back to Wales and teaches this stuff family style on the side of a hill.
It's yeah.
Like I almost don't care how legit or illegit the lineage is. I don't care how authentic the teachings are. The fact that they can pull off a story at that level of insanity and keep it coherent. It's like a self-manifesting power. It's like, yeah, there's so much enlightened power over there that the story doesn't have to make sense. You either get it or you don't, dude.
Oh, well, there was a very now well-respected and well-known, a tree trunk of a lot of lineage branches these days, Dujum Lingpa in the 19th century.
Oh, yeah.
Had no teacher, actually. Just received revelations directly in dream and in visions. He had no living human teacher, and everybody thought he was full of shit until his own students started manifesting. They obviously attained results. So they were like, okay, I guess we have to accept this guy, even though he had no human teacher.
Yeah. Well, I didn't need a human teacher. Fuck all of you clowns. Right. So all of this stuff, it's not, what I want to be clear here is it's not fake it till you make it. And it's not that if they were just, I don't know, some weird Welsh cult, it wouldn't work the same way. But in that numinous sphere at the edge of the legitimate lineages where everything is clear, documented, and bureaucratic, you have these
Which is often corrupt. Most often.
I mean, I've never been close enough to it to find out, right? But there is this numinous circle of people that have some exposure to the normal, authentic schemes, and then run the rest of the show largely on charisma and chutzpah. It's like, oh yeah, those people, yeah, my guru's guru was one of those guys over there, and I got a bunch of transmissions, and yeah, now we do the thing. Okay, right. And the only thing that authenticates those people is, can they do the thing? And you can't tell if they can do the thing unless you can mostly do the thing. And so you wind up in this world, which is kind of like a penumbral, hazy place of extremely high-quality teachers that you can only recognize if you don't really need one. Balls! And I think a lot of the most interesting people in the culture are kind of in that position right now. Because the lineages are kind of weak. There are quite a number of decent teachers kicking around with sort of shitty lineages. And what we're beginning to get on the internet is a kind of cross-fertilization of like semi-credentialed people who are sort of taking a look at each other and being like, oh yeah, those people kind of know what they're doing.
It's an odd scene, credentialing lineage transmission. In Rinzai, it's really cut and dried. You have lineage transmission documents that your teacher do the paperwork.
Yeah. Absolutely. And India likewise. The big dudes in the Indian tradition, for the most part, it's just the old temple boss dies and they install you as the new temple boss, and the temple is the institution and you're the current boss.
Sure.
Who's the current professor of physics in Princeton. And that stuff is like a cultural anchor at one end of the story. And then at the other end, you've got the village gurus who are semi-credentialed, or occasionally are. And then you've got the kind of upstart teaching lineages around things like Nisargadatta Maharaj, who, as a guru, is a guru, teaches a bunch of shit that would be unrecognizable to anybody from his lineage prior to that point. I don't think he ever taught anybody a mantra. Right? You are that. So am I. So is it. Something. Would you like some more tea? Ah! You go. There's this huge activity that comes off the back of that. So I guess part of the reason I'm laying this out is it's very, very, very hard for white people that are interested in meditation. I mean, white people, black people, Americans, Anglos, however you want to think about it. The non-Asian folk, right? I've not yet heard of Vajrayana cults in Nigeria, but when that starts, it'll be the Nigerians as well. Just saying. It's the New York. Half of the world's youth are in Nigeria. Do you think the llamas are already incarnating over there? Imagine coming from a Tibetan body.
I don't know how any of this works.
4'10", malnourished in a Tibetan body in the 19th century, and you reincarnate as a 6'6" Nigerian guy that grew up eating hamburgers and can bench press a Buick. Oh, we're never getting them back out of those bodies. They're just going to vanish over the horizon. That'll be that. Boom. Vajrayana, Nigeria. Why? Oh, the bodies, they're amazing. My God, I could do a one-handed handstand. Sounds like a joke, but it's super not. If you're going to do the human condition, go where the getting is good. Where are they strongest, healthiest, and smartest? Nigeria. Are they kind of evil? Sure, you could cure that. Or not. You could sure have fun trying. So, this notion that there is a sort of turbulent, chaotic circus, authenticated institutions, tight lineages, everything is very sensible. Then a kind of numerous ring of people that are sort of like hanging off the edge of that structure, are pretty well trained, kind of know what they're doing, are capable of teaching, but they're not very well credentialed. And then in that mix, you also have a bunch of corruption at the center and a bunch of shitty predators with no lineage at all. And then outside of that, you have the kind of rambling outer darkness of essentially like ghost cults and other weird shit out there as well. A lot of what's going on,
and then genuine people who show up outside of a lineage context who really know their shit and are good at teaching. Those people crop up.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a number of people that lay claim to that and are shit, right?
Absolutely.
But there are also a number of people that lay claim to that and are actually pretty good. I know some kid whose father is a Welshman who I think was a monk in some Christian outfit. And then had a kind of waking up on the side of a hill thing, drifted out of religion entirely, and runs, a shop in a gallery or some such little, small enterprise thing, and is just stonkingly enlightened and not that interested in explaining it.
Right.
Looks fine to me.
Fully for him.
I mean, I presume he fell off the back of the, Arrow Buddhism wagon. The truck was going by and one of the crates fell off. Wales is not a very big...
in some transmission ceremonies, they won't actually read the text. They'll just have the book, and they'll kind of bonk you on the head with it. Just like, boom, you get it. The whole thing, boom. Boom.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I've taken initiations which were very much of that format. They're great stories. But the semantically useful piece of this is nobody is really teaching the map of how the whole thing works overall, right? So this notion that there is a kind of, bureaucratic structure akin to professorships in universities at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have people that are like helicopter mechanic lineages, where, where did you learn to fix helicopters? Oh, well, I used to work on Base 21 fixing Sikorskis, and then I've been at this little, place in Arkansas for 20 years, and we fix everything that comes in and out of this airport. Both of those people are doing mechanical engineering. They do different jobs. They've got different kinds of lineage, right? But if you want a helicopter fixed, you need to go to the guy in Arkansas. And if you want to understand how to design a helicopter, you're talking to the guy at Princeton. And the notion that there are similar bands of understanding with authentic lineages that are of very different types inside of the sphere of Dharma, capital D, widest sense.
That's not very well known among people who are just coming in. And people are very disoriented. I mean, frequently I have conversations with people because I have traipsed around between a couple of different Buddhist lineages, and I'm actively involved in some still. So they're like, I am completely befuddled and confused. What the hell? How do I navigate this?
And, that is a story, right? So, we are reasonably well trained. We've seen, we've spent a lot of time with people that are very well trained. And we're casually joking about Tibetan wizards reincarnating in the bodies of science fiction writers to steer an entire planet away from technological abyss. We both consider that to be a perfectly reasonable and realistic thing. Right? You don't look at me and are just like, Vinay, you're insane. It's like, well, yeah, you might be insane. The world is probably more insane than either of us can imagine. It wouldn't be the strangest thing that's documented as Dharma in 500 years. Fine.
No.
So that problem of, for newcomers into the space, you cannot tell the difference between what is absurd and not true and what is absurd and totally true.
Or absurd and might be true.
Might be true, and there are tools for handling might be true. Like the lineages are really good when somebody comes in from another guru and tells you some fabulous story about their guru's amazing accomplishments. There are like half a dozen diplomatic protocols for handling that story. It's like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Tell me some more. What was your guru's guru like? Right? And, depending on when you ask that question, that can be fuck you and fuck your couch, or it can be... Or that could be genuinely like, wow, your people are really onto something here. Where did this all come from? This is fantastic, right? And the diplomacy of whether asking about somebody's guru's guru is fuck you and fuck your couch, or my God, you people are amazing, I really want to know more, half a second's gap in timing, or whether the Lama is looking right at somebody when they ask the question, or kind of staring into space, right?
Yep.
So you come into that as somebody that doesn't have a lot of access and try and find authentic teachers.
Oh, it's devilishly difficult, having done it as a white boy who didn't have any help or context starting out much.
Yeah.
I was really lucky with some of the people I met early on who had a lot of training, actually. One of the first people I was able to speak with in depth was a professor of philosophy and religion who had done 13 years of hard training in Rinzai Zen in Japan. Just so happened to be at my local university, and I was able to talk to him and go out for coffee.
Jeez. Wow, you really did get lucky. And Rinzai, I think, is a particularly low bullshit lineage. I mean, I don't know too much about it in detail, but it certainly gives the appearance of being low bullshit.
Yeah. There's a saying within the lineage that if you don't exceed your teacher's attainment, you cut the lineage in half. The lineage declines by half.
Wow. Yeah.
There's also another saying that if you want to maintain the house, uphold the lineage, you have to be willing to walk up a mountain of swords barefoot. It's a high bar.
And it sounds like
at any one time in the officially credentialed Rinzai school, there's only 80. I'm not sure how many there are now, but there's only 80 to 100 fully credentialed teachers in the whole Rinzai lineage worldwide.
Yeah. It's kind of what you want. And to bring this around to the Nths.
Quality control.
So to bring it around to the Nths, which was the point of this entire story. So there is a Nth temple in Gorakhpur, right? It's where they've got the body of Gorakshnath, or the ashes, or the, Terma, whatever the hell it is they have out there, not Terma, something. But there's a Gorakhpur temple. People like me don't really pay much attention to it. Maybe I should, I don't know. And the guy that is set up in the Gorakhpur temple is the boss man over there, is Yogi Adityanath, who, if you think Trump is Orange Hitler, wait till you see the Indian version. Right? Actual Orange Hitler. Right?
Yeah.
Like Mola Ram from Indiana.
Extreme Hindu nationalist, just pretty,
Personal symbol is a bulldozer. Right? And he might turn out to be Nelson Mandela, but let us not forget that Nelson Mandela was initially a terrorist.
He certainly was.
Right? So if we talk about radical decolonization of India, We got rid of the English. We got rid of the Portuguese. Next up, perhaps.
Well, who's next?
Right?
When you can easily see how that could turn nasty and
Way,
quick, as it has,
right?
and continues to.
Consider Northern Ireland, where the Catholics have been invaded by Protestants, and they would still like the 6 counties back, please. Excuse me, that is ours. It's currently populated by Protestants. You can't have it. Well, we're taking it eventually. It's only a question of when, say the Irish. Right? So if you think of the Muslims in India as being a bit like the Protestants in Ireland, it's obvious that eventually Ireland will be reunified, and at that point we're talking Pakistan and Bangladesh. Said Orange Hitler.
Said Orange Hitler. And then you combine that with, climate and resource scarcity, and things get...
Right. And, the Taliban...
And nuclear states. Both India and Pakistan.
Bad, right? But the Taliban are slowly eroding control in Pakistan. So the prospect is that the Taliban inherit the Pakistani nuclear arsenal.
Delightful.
Oh, yeah, right? And by the way, I worry about this stuff in a professional capacity, right? Like, as an Indian-aligned Westerner with a strong interest in this kind of stuff, the little lectures that I will occasionally give somebody about the real politics of India and what Adityanath represents and the Pakistani nuclear arsenal and Talibanization, and by the way, do you know what the Mughals did? Right?
Yeah.
The look on Western defense intellectuals' faces hearing a shitty Indian perspective on what's going on over there.
The realistic expectations of ethno-religious hatred and genocide violence, they're pretty awful.
But they're also completely in line with what happened everywhere else.
Oh, absolutely. It wouldn't be surprising, basically. And I guess people are surprised.
Well, people are surprised largely because Gandhi is mostly a PR operation by the Indians trying to persuade the English that they should leave peacefully. Right? Oh, we are so nice. There is nothing mean about us at all. We have no military interest in anything. No, you can leave us alone and nothing bad will ever happen. Trust me, I am Mahatma Gandhi. Oh. And he basically
I read your spiritual cutting through spiritual colonialism piece, by the way, which I recommend people read. It's well worth reading.
Ah, thank you. So if you think of Gandhi as basically snake charming the English out of India, Gandhi as fakir, right? He knows the Indians are a bunch of medieval thugs that will go to war at the drop of a hanky. He understands the history of India is mostly, right? I mean, he understands what the Bhagavad Gita is. Arjuna, how are you doing? Oh, Lord Krishna, I don't want to go over there and kill my cousin.
I really don't want to massacre all of these people.
Right?
Tough cities.
Get with the program. Right? So, Gandhi comes along and basically kind of puts a layer of plaster over all of that stuff long enough to get the English to leave without it turning into a huge war. Right? But promises one to India and delivers 3. And then 2 of those Indias become nuclear, and one of those Indias is losing its nation-state status as Pakistan becomes Talibanistan. Taliban win in Afghanistan. Afghan and Pakistan, big old border. They're over the other side of that border now, and they're eroding the control of the state. Eventually, they will reach the nuclear weapons, and either the bombs are in the silos when the Taliban arrive, or the bombs are already gone and somebody's taken them.
And Bangladesh is going underwater.
Well, they don't have any nukes. We don't care. Pragmatic.
From the nuclear armament perspective.
Yeah, sure. Bangladesh is a humanitarian crisis. Pakistan is a nuclear crisis. So into that, you then put the authentic, real Orange Hitler, of whom Trump is merely a reflection in his orangeness and his Hitleriness, right? And Adityanath is basically like, right then, consider me to be the Catholic equivalent of Ian Paisley. I'm here to speak for the old country and its old ways and get rid of all of this nonsense from these colonials. But they've been here for hundreds of years. I don't care at all. That's a blink in an eye in our timeline. My temple's 40 times older than that, and that's one of the younger ones. We've been here since before the pyramids. Why are they here telling us what to do? Right? And if you think of that, you take the templates from Northern Ireland, or you take the templates from Kenya or South Africa and apply them to India. This is essentially what Adityanath and those guys are doing. Now, the prospect that will turn into some kind of, massive internecine nuclear genocidal holocaust, 1 in 4? It could.
I don't like those odds.
And and it would probably have a death toll like 4 times the size of World War One. Right, the humanitarian consequences would be like nothing ever seen on this planet. Unbelievable, right? So the notion that I am part of the lineage, which has that as one of its most visible manifestations. Right. I, by the way, did not ask for this lineage. My guru told me to go and take this lineage, and so I did, and here we are, right? But imagine being some random white kid who's interested in meditation. And you realize that your meditation instructor is directly lineally connected to a likely future nuclear religious Knights Templar order style taking over of a 1.4 billion person state.
Yeah. How do you make sense of that? How does that not fuck you up?
Well,
basically.
If I can't make sense of that, what hope would some kid coming to learn meditation have? Right?
Yeah.
And so this thing, as somebody that is sort of pretty well positioned in that you have proper lineage teachers and shit, but you are also part of the internet dharma scene in that you are basically saying like, hey, we have proper teachers and shit, and you could learn how to do this without sawing off your own foot. How would that be? The presence of both decent knowledge and not too much evil political turbulence folded in with the decent knowledge.
Which is basically what Shinzen has attempted to do. He's a Vajracharya in the Shingon school, did decades of Rinzai Zen training, and studied with teachers in the Theravadan traditions as well. And his attempt is, what if we could just have the Enlightenment tech and let's leave the other stuff? Which people can debate how successful he's been at that, but that's why I've signed up and did the teacher training with him and his organization. Yeah. Though for my personal practice and so on, I still am at home in those lineage transmission traditions.
Absolutely. So this is a kind of structure, right? What I want to kind of flesh out for your listeners is the idea that there is a political framework in which these transmissions occur. In Tibet, the country was run by lamas. In Nepal, you had a king that was installed by a Hindu wizard.
Yeah, feudal theocracies.
All this, right? And there is some church-state separation in some places and not in others, and it varies over time, and all the stuff about, the yogis are renounced, so they can't hold political title other than getting elected. Right? So, it's so difficult as somebody, if you're young, white, and serious, you can't get more than 6 feet into your practice until you start hitting this political stuff.
Yeah.
And
it's right, you scratch it and boom.
Right? And nobody's documenting it for those kids.
No.
I've never seen a base map. Right. So here's the political bullshit associated with each one of these meditation lineages, right? This is where that meditation lineage has blessed a genocide. For the Japanese Zen tradition, it's here. For the Indian...
It was Zen at War. Yeah, here, Zen at War, good book. Go read it.
How many times? People don't understand that the yogis had armies. There was 100,000 person army run by the Nagas that went out there and fought the British and lost, if I remember correctly. So that notion that there is a political layer, there's a militaristic layer, there is blessing and condoning of genocides entirely too often, there are future political considerations that are hot. The Turkish Sufis, around the turn of the 20th century, the first 20, 30 years of the 20th century, the Turkish Sufis were armed militias riding around in the mountains at times. And you'll see these pictures of these Turkish Sufis with their Turkish Sufi hats sitting on ponies with rifles. Oh, there's, Mullah so-and-so on his rifle with his brigade of... Wow. Really? Okay. No, well, right then. And so, you've got these white kids who are coming into this stuff with like a Californian political consciousness, right? And every single lineage is wrapped around crazy historical
with money and politics and violence.
And all the rest of that kind of stuff. And then we wonder why they turn to beings who have no lineage at all and tell everybody that they got it from the fucking Star-Lord transmissions handed to them on a 1970s cassette tape. You
Which,
know,
you know, I haven't met anyone who speaks like that I've been particularly impressed by, but maybe I just haven't met the right person. I don't know
well,
why.
and, I don't know, right? And I see a lot of people that clearly look like freaking aliens teaching weird meditation stuff that doesn't look too familiar. So it's like the lineages are so bad they're just dropping aliens into human bodies and telling them to teach whatever local shit they had at home.
No, I've heard a bunch of stories actually of people kind of receiving, what sound like alien termas, basically.
Alien
Um,
oh, God.
yeah. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
Your fault. Alien terma. I mean, Ethereum, by the way, is one of the things that is said to be an alien terma. If you were to translate some of the rules around it. Not going to go into that, just bookmark it for later. So, the point of this entire thrust and trajectory is this. It would be nice if some people, and I think it has to be a set of people across lineage, produced a political base map of where the bodies are buried for most of the normal teaching traditions that could be a sort of standard internet reference document, right?
Sure.
Here's all the shit about how the Lamas actually ran Tibet prior to. It sucks. Here's a link.
Prisoners of Shangri-La. That's a good book, good reference for that.
Or that dodgy book that was commissioned by the Catholics that makes the Tibetans look like genocidal maniacs. So you need not only the text, but you also need the critique of the text, at least as a hyperlink. And that as a model, here's the 4 or 5 horrible things that Hinduism has been involved in. Right? Here's why the Vaishnavas are assholes. Here's why the Shiva people are monsters. Oh, the Brahma people, they're all good. Don't worry about that. Right? Here's why the South Indians are dicks. Here's why the North Indians are monsters. By the way, have we told you about the history of Sufism? And just to give people a political base map, right? So that when you got into this stuff, people weren't going into this disassociated haze of assuming that these transmissions all existed outside of space-time in some crystalline museum. Right?
Right.
To all intents and purposes, people think that the Dharma...
These methods will take your consciousness out of fixated space and time and completely, and still, here we are in these fleshly bodies.
Embedded
involved in history.
Because people act as if the transmissions happen on planet Krypton. It's just this kind of
a pure and undefiled, unsullied.
That's what I'm saying, right? Anything that happened before 1950 happened on Krypton, and everything since then has happened in this horrible, horrible swamp filled with assholes. That's how it really is. And without that base map, I think what we're losing is like a third or 2/3 of the students come in expecting to get a passport to Krypton as part of the teaching kit. And then they discover they're still in the real world and they say, fuck this for a game of soldiers. Right? So that need for basically regrounding the historical truth of the lineages, I mean, it could be a 4-page document that was mostly links. Here are all the big lineages that are teaching in the West. Here are the places where the political, economic, and military shit hit the fan for those lineages in the past few centuries.
These are the skeletons in the closet. This is where the bodies are buried.
Exactly. And, we don't have to go any more recent than about 1970. Right? The stuff which is within living memory is generally speaking searchable in Google, and you can get oriented to exactly what the fuck happened pretty easily. So I'm not suggesting this is a modern guru scandal sheet. What I'm saying is if we draw a line...
There are enough of those already.
That's well documented, right? But if we drew a line about World War II and said, these are the major events in the previous 500 years that are politically significant and shape the form of these lineages... here's how Taoism and imperialism were combined in China. Here's what was going on with the Mughal empires and the Hindu resistance to the Mughal empires.
The Buddhist monasterial tax evasion schemes in Tang Dynasty China, which were rampant.
Huge, right? Not small. Wars fought, all the rest of that. Just so that when folks are coming in, they can kind of get a sense that all this actually happened in the same space-time they're in now. Right? It did not happen on Krypton. These lineages went through the mud century after century after century after century, lotus-like, rising above the mud, but nonetheless, this is where the roots are.
And the usual advice from within the tradition, is, from the exemplars of the tradition is, go to the outskirts, practice, like your hair is on fire, find a genuine teacher, and just, throw your life into it and stay away from the institutional politics, basically. Stay away from the money, stay away from the power, stay away from the crowded centers. Just don't.
Stay out of history. History's a bad place.
Yeah, that's usually the advice, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that is, broadly speaking,
And then if you put the time in and you come to realization, then please come back and help out. That's usually how it goes.
And now we get to the fun part, which is the election. See how we were going somewhere, right? So we have this long, murky trail of, everything is weird and horrible, and the real world is a bad place, and the lineages was flowing through century after century through the mud, and then, bang! We're recording this
Trump
on
v. Harris.
Trump v. Harris. Well, Musk v. What do you call it? BlackRock? Is it Trump v. Harris?
Is I guess finance capital the majority? Is it behind Harris? I haven't been paying that much attention, to be honest.
I mean, my God, everybody's terrified of Trump. If you have anything to lose in America, you're scared of Donald Trump.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, full on.
Because his policies and what, yeah. If Trump gets a second term, there will be massive winners and massive losers, and there's a lot of money at stake.
We do say that, right? So let's set place and time. Saturday, 2nd of November, right? I've not looked at the news this morning. I'm sure it's terrible. Right? So here we are as wizards, sort of at the edge of the empire. You're packed out in some small town. I live in
a city of 1 million people, actually.
Oh yeah, really? There you go. Which for Canada is a big city.
It's a big city. Yeah, it's the farthest north population center in North America, anyway. Yeah.
My God, it must be so cold in winter.
Oh yes, terribly. Yeah, sometimes it gets to -40.
How close is the nearest polar bear?
I don't know. I don't know what their ranges are.
Okay, but like 500 miles?
Maybe. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. God. So I live in a little English village, I guess. About an hour from London. And I hang out in this little English village, and then I go to town, to meet people. And once in a while, I'll fly to America and I'll hang out in DC with some of the people.
Hang out in DC, and
like you could pick up 2 years worth of toxicity in a long weekend in DC. And then I come back and I stare out the window, and there are lots of rabbits and occasionally deer and foxes. The foxes are loud, wretched bastards.
That they're scream. Yeah,
just all day and all night. When it's fox time, when it's fox party time. And so on one hand, the world just sort of goes by. But on the other hand, the thing that drags me into civilization is I can't drive a fucking car. I mentioned before that I have kind of weird pervasive brain damage. One of the things I can't do is drive. So consequently, I have to live within reach of either public transport or reliable taxi services. And if that was not true, I'd be living in a goddamn solar-powered school bus, in some corner of the Colorado mountains, off-grid, unheard of, with a Starlink. I would just vanish and leave and never be seen. The only thing keeping me in civilization is I'm retarded. I'm serious. If I could drive, none of this would be happening. A neurological defect traps me in society. But I mean, maybe self-driving.
More fortune for us that you are here.
You say that now, right? Let's see what happens when Adityanath takes over in India, whether everybody still likes Swahi Banana. Because, how many people embedded in the military...
Speaking about you specifically.
Well, but how many people in the military-industrial complex could explain to a 2-star general what a Nath is?
Well, you might be the only one. I don't know. Yeah.
2, 3, maybe some of the Gurkhas could do a good job of it. There are plenty of Gurkhas. But if it's coming from an actual practicing Nath, I am bracing for the possibility that I'm going to wind up as a political representative of Adityanath to the Western military powers.
That's a possible future.
That's not a good future for anybody, right? I mean, it's probably quite entertaining, but it makes more sense as an episode of a comedy than as a future for a human race. Are you reassured?
No, but that's okay.
I'm not reassured either, and it appears to be my story. So this is the thing I really want to kind of bite down on, right? The reason I went on such a long preamble through fiction and all the rest of that stuff was to get to a very specific and very subtle point, which is we are at the end of the old story completely. You know, global warming, the only card left to play is geoengineering. Walking around robots that have some kind of AI that they speak like people is clearly coming within a year or two. The large language model. Well, you put a large language model into a robot body, and it will be capable of fetching your luggage, making you a hamburger, or teaching you math.
Yeah, I don't know about the advances in robotics. I don't follow this stuff. Anyway.
They might not be good robots, but they're definitely going to look like people. Even if it's a tailored dummy on roller skates. Think of a Roomba with a tailored dummy. Right? You're dealing with a species so stupid that if you put googly eyes on an industrial robot, worker resistance to working with them drops by 20%. I'm not joking. There are studies, right? So that's what I'm saying, right? So that said, like the AI is here, geoengineering is the only game left in town. The robots are coming, right? Ukraine, the footage of how the Ukraine war is actually running. Drones flying over patches of forest, dumping thermal,
dive bombing,
right? And
or just dropping grenades, or
grenades. All those little footage of Russian soldiers surrendering to drones. Don't kill us! And this thing is it's being driven by a 13-year-old kid with a flying robot hand grenade license. So my suggestion is basically this: the world that was consensus reality is dead in the last 18 months. Right. The AI arrived. There is no point reducing our CO2 consumption at this point because it's not going to do shit for climate in the critical window. We are only left with geoengineering, and it's a question of how soon can we get it done. And AI is going to wipe out everything that we assume about how the world works, guaranteeably, unless civilization crashes so badly that AI development stops. So if we then look at the US election...
You could debate timelines, but that, sure. Yeah.
Could debate timelines. So if we then look at the US election through...
I'm not informed enough to do that, so...
Oh, yeah. I am... I've spent a bunch of time looking at it, and consciousness is not coming anytime soon, except by surprise, but all of the industrial uses is good enough now.
Sure. Yeah.
Google says like 25% of their code base is now written by AI, something like that. Did I see that this morning on Twitter? I don't know. Anyway, so...
Well, I can never tell how much is marketing hype to prop up the valuations of some of these companies and how much is true. But who knows? We'll find out.
So what we're doing is we're looking at the precedent of the 4 years of evolution in which these things are going to flip from one place to another. Probably 4 years from now, geoengineering will have gotten started, at least as a research project. AI will have improved out of all possible recognition. Robots will probably be doing a whole bunch of jobs that are currently done by humans, and more importantly, a whole bunch of jobs which are not done by humans. And everything is going to look different. Self-driving cars, robot taxis, all the rest of that, it's all going to be here. And we're talking about who's going to be president through that transitional window.
Wild times.
Wild times. So I don't think either Musk or Harris, not Musk, I don't think either Trump or Harris has a rat's ass in hell of navigating America through that transition successfully.
Well, what does success look like in the midst of all of this change and likely disaster?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that they're not the last president of America.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the first thing. Is
basic requirement of the job that you hope is fulfilled.
Should go forward. So this gets us down to our good friends, the industrialists. Thiel, who is by all accounts kind of a monster. Musk, who is by all accounts kind of a monster. They're very effective, but they are not exactly nice. Unsurprisingly.
Very effective people often are not nice.
It's a Tyrannosaurus, and it's fairly nice for a Tyrannosaurus. Nice for a Tyrannosaurus. Big, though. Hungry looking. Nice Tyrannosaur. Can we feed it donuts and keep it away from our children? How many donuts did you bring? 4 metric tons. That might work. Right? You see what I'm saying? So what I want to basically lay out the stall here and say is this. If Harris wins and takes America down an anti-tech pathway, in all probability, this moves a lot of geostrategic clout to China and the BRICS.
Because you think the talent or the capital will fly into those spheres? It'll move borders. The staff and the brain drain will occur.
China has no shortage of brain. It's just if the Americans spend 4 years doing bureaucracy and congressional hearings, and the Chinese spend 4 years building product.
Sure.
Right. And one of the things I want to note there is that large language models are trained on data sets produced by humans.
And China has the most of that of any, they're constantly collecting huge reams of data.
Longest history in that language, and most number of people producing new work in that language. It may be that Chinese large language models are exquisitely larger than Western ones once the entire corpus is in there. Right. But it also could be that the structure of English is uniquely well suited to AI or anti-suited to AI, and we just don't know yet, as far as I can tell.
There are also demographic issues, which I hear from people who seem to have their heads screwed on right are going to come due.
The state stability questions on demographics are staggering, right? And again, this is the swamp, right? The kind of three sides of that. One of the resources that we're running scarce of is young people.
Babies.
Babies, yeah. I did an org chart for a thing recently, and it was like 6 or 7 world-class 70-year-olds, a couple of fairly decent 50-year-olds, of whom I was one, and one really talented 30-year-old. And I just looked at that pyramid like, oh my god, we're doomed. Holy shit, we're past peak capability. Fuck.
And the quality of education, in my opinion, having recently been through some of it, is looking at my cohorts, my peers, and the quality of education given, and the tools and capabilities and cognitive sophistication that people are coming out of that education with. I'm like, well, this is just not at all capable to the task.
Right. Oh yeah,
no.
There's a book called Designing Freedom by a guy called Stafford Beer. And it's written in English as it was spoken by the intellectuals of that time period. And I had to read it with a dictionary. The grammar was very sophisticated, not complex, very clear, but very sophisticated. And he used a bunch of words in ways that I didn't recognize as correct. And then I looked them up, and it turned out that I didn't understand exactly what that word meant, and the meaning was actually very specific. And that was the point where I began to realize that, standards really had dropped. And okay, I was educated in a fucking sheep farming town, but even so. So here's the election, right? You got this period of unprecedented technological change, and you have one candidate that wants to regulate technology, another candidate that is a puppet, and then the people that are going to be operating that puppet are South Africans.
Yeah.
Now, this is not to say that being a South African permanently morally taints you. After all, Nelson Mandela was a South African. But the notion that you might see an apartheid thread go from South Africa into America, hybridize with that old KKK slavery thing, and come out in the form of the Nixon administration.
It's not completely inconceivable.
I think it's already happened. I
think of apartheid as requiring a pretty robust legal regime and enforcement. Where is that happening, if so?
Well, America had functional apartheid until the mid-90s.
Oh, sure. Until the 60s. Right?
Until the 60s. Yeah. So at this point, if you were going to do something that looked like apartheid in America, I don't think it would be anything like apartheid, but I think it would be dismantling the entire civil rights framework as a way of cutting the federal budget.
Which they've made good progress on and want to do more. Right. Plenty folks, yeah.
You basically just defund everything that looks like work on human rights in those frameworks, etc., etc., etc. So I sort of feel like we are getting wedged here between two horrible options. Option one, try and control technology, but you don't have global control, so you can only slow it up in America, and the American right and the tech community fuse into a single horrible unit, basically space Nazis, and in the process of trying to control that in America...
They have the currents of the Dark Enlightenment trend. Some of these people are explicitly monarchist, or the elite should know that there should be a self-conscious ruling elite that controls the vast or all of the resources and political power, and the demos should just be demoted back to being, well, the demos, the hoi polloi, the know nothings who control nothing, know nothing, and work for us, basically.
Yeah. And once you've got robots, you don't even need them to work for you, and that's also extremely concerning. And then you move the hot seat moves to China. If China is a year ahead on AGI, if China manages to build a replica of SpaceX, this kind of stuff. Whoa. So down one trajectory, you get this kind of very weird outcome, right? Down the other trajectory, you get the kind of Nerdreich takeover of America, and you get something that looks like the Terran Federation, not something that looks like, or what was it called in the Terran Empire? Terran Empire, right? You basically get people that thought that the Star Trek guys wearing the beards were the cool ones.
I shouldn't laugh.
yes, you should. So, all those folks that really thought the Terran Empire had it together, and that was really what Star Trek should have been like, right? Star Trek Troopers of the Terran Empire was the science fiction that those guys were into. I'm just checking the name of it. I'm pretty sure it was, Terran Empire. So, if our choice is between Terran Empire and hand the future to China as America basically becomes Europe in a hail of regulation, I think these options are so bad that I hope something weird happens. I don't know what the weird would be. Like, there must be some weird thing. Like, J.D. Vance goes to Burning Man and discovers that everything is okay. Or, they wind up with they wind up with an indeterminate election, and the deal is that they're going to have, Vance will be president and, Schwartz will be vice president or something like that. Whatever his name is, Harris's running mate,
Waltz,
Tim Waltz,
I think.
Waltz, yeah. Or so you just wind up with some kind of consensus thing where, Harris gets 2 years as president and then she switches with Vance, or like that thing where the old model was the president was from one party and the vice president was from the other.
Sure. Yep.
We tried that. So maybe what we wind up with is some kind of, revolutionary remash of the situation. Because short of something like that, I don't think there's a viable administration on either path. Which really kind of frightens me.
As it should. I mean, if you care at all about local and global human well-being, the governance of the United States matters a whole heck of a lot.
Whole heck of a lot. And so that is a weird position for me to be in, because I sort of look at this as like, within the scope of the thinkable, there are only bad answers. Can we get out?
Yeah, I mean, my default assumption is that things will continue much as they are now, if not worse, with new technology, and that there is technological progress, but basically, nothing much in the moral domain is learned or conserved. It dies with the people who embody it, for the most part.
Oh yeah.
And then there's a few enclaves of wisdom that transmit, but mostly it's just not. And there's technological progress, which is great, and thank God for modern dentistry. I think, as you point out, in anesthesia, dentistry, technological progress is real, undeniable, amazing. Moral progress is fragile and vulnerable to complete collapse within. Well, what's the saying? Every society is only 3 days of hunger away from. I forget what word they use. Violence.
Something.
Misery. Yeah.
Awesome. So this is a frame. Solar panels are sort of inherently moral. Well-tested vaccines with proper risk communication are probably inherently moral. I do feel like there is a moral arc to a lot of this technology. Caffeine, probably immoral. Meth, probably immoral.
You think caffeine is immoral? Maybe.
I am fairly sure that caffeine, by the way, like most painkillers, is an empathy suppressant.
That makes sense, actually. Considering my own experience with coffee, I go for green tea these days. Coffee turns me into an asshole sometimes. So
sure. And you multiply that by 250 million Americans that are addicted to the stuff.
I mean, caffeine. There's good arguments to be made that caffeine created the British Empire, right?
fuel of capitalism, in the same way that meth created the Nazis,
right,
and the North
and a
Koreans.
whole heck of lots of other things as well. But amphetamines, meth, yep,
meth powered. So yeah, I think that's my vote. My vote is the only path forward is an unthinkable one that we have not yet seen. God only knows.
And maybe not even him. It, them, she.
Gods only know. You can almost imagine this as a kind of Mahabharata thing where you've got all the assembled gods supporting their various factions in the American political thing, and eventually Vishnu is like, you know what? I don't like this game. Oh, and then a Godzilla appears.
There's this very funny sutta in the early Buddhist canon where they're ragging on their other shramana and what today their Vedic counterparts there, because the Buddhists love to do this in their scripture and rhetoric, where the Buddha travels to the highest heaven. No, it's not the Buddha. It's one of the Buddha's senior disciples. One of the monks travels to the highest heaven, ascending the celestial hierarchy, asking, like, does anyone know, about the cessation and the foundation and the origination of the cosmos? And they're like, I don't, but, check higher up, check with my boss. Yeah. And they take it all the way up the chain to Mahabrahma, I believe. And he says, oh, of course I know. And then, he shoos his attendants aside and takes the monk aside and says, I don't actually know. Don't tell anyone.
That's what I'm talking about. Rama ding.
And then the monk goes back. And then the monk goes back to the Buddha, who declares that the origination and cessation of the cosmos is within this fathom-long body.
Yeah. And of course, making that shit up. I mean, all this stuff. So I unfortunately have to go soon, so I will leave this as a pickup for the next future session we come into. So
sure.
The open thread I will leave is this. It blows my mind that the Tibetans did not do a structural overhaul of Buddhism for the West, starting with Charles Darwin. Right? If Chogyam fucking Trungpa, what a thing, right? There is no parsing it. There is no knowing it. There is no imagining it. So at that point, we can tell any story you like. If Chogyam fucking Trungpa, to whom I've, all due respect, but I don't know how much respect is due, nonetheless, the power is clear.
Unclear.
Chogyam fucking Trungpa, if he had seized upon Darwinism with great force and just said, look, fucking dependent co-arising equals biological evolution. This is what we really meant. It comes from nowhere and you're stuck in it. It's called evolution. Right? Here is the great class of things that are called dependent co-arising. The one that caused you to dependently co-arise is called Darwinian evolution. Shit sucks because you evolved to reproduce, not to be happy, and your job is to hack that goddamn system and get a decent life for yourself. I think they could,
which was basically Shinzen's take. He said as much in many places.
Go Shinzen, right? So that work of truly scientific overhaul of Buddhism, I think it could cut the hassle of teaching Buddhism from scratch to white folks by an order of magnitude. Certainly a factor of 5, possibly a factor of 10. If you then inhale the Star Trek canon and wind up with a sort of like Spock-influenced cosmic Mahayana in spaceships kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing technology is appearing, and only our moral sense will give us either the Star Trek, the Vulcans, or the Borg. All of these are on the table technologically, and we have to choose how we co-evolve with our techno-social systems. Those are some worked examples. I think we want to be about midway between the Federation and the Vulcans, please. Right? If we wind up with 20% Klingon, we can live with it, but we're not turning into the fucking Romulans, and we're definitely not turning into the fucking Borg. We'll stay people, and we'll try and be nice to each other.
May it be so.
I think there is the kernel of the possibility of something which is a staggeringly impactful, culturally appropriate, modernized, sleek Buddhism. Right?
Yeah. Which is Shinzen's product, basically.
Is that Shinzen's portrait? I mean, I have seen Chapman
and the ongoing research he's now engaging in at the University of Arizona with transcranial ultrasonic stimulation, basically to remove the hindrances to rapid progress on awakening. That's their project.
I hate that shit. Could they not just take LSD with normal people? But Alan Chapman's meaningness stuff. That thing he's got that piece about a Dzogchen shaped hole in culture.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know exactly how tight the ties are between Dzogchen and the Nths tradition, but the Dzogchen folks
historically same ground,
pretty close, right?
As far as I can tell from the reading I've done.
I've not spent any time really hanging out in a formal setting with Dzogchen people, but I quite often meet them socially, and it's just like, the one deck of cards, and they're playing gin rummy, and we're playing top trumps. I mean, it's just very, very close. Same cards, same people at the table, slightly different game. Culturally, like the instinct. We are about to order food, and the Dzogchen people and the Nths people have the same instinct about how one would get the group together to get a food order in.
Yeah, it says something about the training and the results and how it manifests.
You see what I'm saying? Like, the social protocol level is identical, and the sort of notion of like, well, our job here is to be nice and happy and chill and stuff, and so we're going to do this in an efficient way. This is an efficient way of ordering food, so we don't have to waste time on bureaucracy. We're just going to sort this out. It'll be very quick and efficient, and then we can go back to having fun, right? Right, okay, now we do it. And that thing is just a very distinctive thing, that the taking of temporary power to assert bureaucratic control over a short-lived process that should just get done by magic, and then you put the responsibility down again and nobody's actually in charge, but you have one person convening for long enough to solve a problem. That, as a social reflex, those are the only two places I've seen that done. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So, they're just a bunch of
very few exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that in itself is cool stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, basically, I think that there is an opportunity for a radical overhaul to produce a truly Western Buddhism. I think it could be, and this is the controversial part, and this is where I'm going to love you and leave you. I think it could be a lot better than Buddhism has ever been. Which
is going to step on some people's toes. You saying that, and God forbid that, or Buddha forbid, or whatever. Christian reflex upbringing.
Oh yeah, but if Buddha had access to Darwin, I think the Buddhist teaching
would have been saying some different things.
He would have been saying some different things. I think the Buddhist insight about dukkha and all the rest of that would have been identical. I think the Four Noble Truths would have been identical. But I think the teaching approach, so much of the kind of epicycle, like blah blah blah, we don't really understand cause and effect, blah blah blah, okay, all of that just gets replaced with Darwinian evolution and deep cosmology. We don't really know exactly what the origin of matter is or what the origin of space-time is, but let me tell you, it's really big, it's really old, and you're unbelievably tiny in both space and time. Stop thinking this is about you. Whatever is happening, it's 1 trillion times bigger than you are in every possible dimension. 57.
There's a coherent story there to be told.
You see what I'm saying, right? And if the Buddha had access to all of that stuff, plus the Buddha's insight, the ability to teach into a culture that already has Darwinism and basic cosmology, I think the first 80% of Buddhism is just trying to communicate the same feelings that are inside of Darwinism and basic cosmology. Time is long. You came into this world by accident. You don't particularly like it here, and there's no reason we would expect you to, but you are not powerless. You can't help yourself, and you can be helped to help yourself. Hi, how are you doing? It would be amazing.
Well, I consider that homework.
Well, I mean, for the next 500 years, the next 500 Buddhist wizards. But, I think it's very important that Buddhist teachers in the West consider themselves to be in the early stages of building the best Buddhism that has ever been. Because I think it's within reach. The Hindus, there's no real point in trying to build the best Hinduism that's ever been, because there isn't even really a Hinduism.
Sure, that's a British colonial imposition on a huge diversity.
Huge diversity, and the Hindu religion, when all is said and done, you have enlightenment. Okay, great, we all know that, right? But then it's embedded in something where the closest cultural analog to Hinduism, to be honest, is the Marvel Universe. infinite gods, infinite superheroes, infinite dimensions, cause and effect, constant crisis. Everything is on fire apart from huge cosmic oceans of wonderfulness where nothing ever happens because Wonder Woman is still in charge over there. And, there's no real point in trying to modernize something so huge and baroque.
Yeah.
It's a legacy system. It's probably the world's best legacy system, but it doesn't have any of the necessary affordances to go through efficient modernization. Right? If we're going to see a large-scale Dharma activity in the West that packs the lessons in, adapts to the culture, makes itself sleek and efficient, and then goes out there and rolls, it's not coming out of Hinduism. Because none of the incentives are there, none of the structures are there, none of the pointedness is there. Oh, if you don't become enlightened in this incarnation, don't worry, it's going to take you 20,000 years minimum anyway. Just try not to make your situation existentially worse, and just kind of play the ball when it comes to you. You're fine. You're just not going to get a world-saving solution out of those equations because they're not intended to be a world. It's just not a system that's meant to rescue things. Right? It's a non-intervention system. It's like asking Amazon if it could step in to run an ambulance service. You could get anything you want from our catalog. Believe me, we have all of it. The shipping may take 3 or 4 millennia. 2 kalpas for shipping expected. Right? Right? It's just not there. But if you have a pizza delivery service and you looked at a pizza delivery service and said, hey, maybe we need this to be an ambulance, you could just about see how to do it if you had to in an emergency. So I think that basically Buddhism has a much closer shape to the idea of a direct intervention in the shit show than Hinduism does. And I think that a Western Buddhist teachers, should feel some pressure to innovate and make the world's best Buddhism work, because I think America could really use it. And I think, David Chapman's piece about Dzogchen shaped whole and culture, more power to that project.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time.
Yeah, I gotta skedaddle.
You have to go. Thanks so much for coming on, Vinay. People can find. I'll put links to your stuff, your Twitter. Is there a website you want me to direct people to, or?
We could point them at the cutting machinery stuff, but then I'm going to have a whole bunch of new people looking at the cutting machinery stuff.
Why don't we listen to this? We'll see.
We'll see how the election goes. Maybe link them to cutting through spiritual colonialism. That's probably, if there's just one link thing for people to read, that's probably the one. Or maybe the piece, if you read the piece about the economics of enlightenment.
No, I think I might have started on it. I don't know if I read the whole thing back to front, but
it basically says if meditation is a minimum wage job, how much do you have to pay yourself to get enlightened? That's quite interesting. Anyway, I'll find you some links, but let's try and steer people away from the rabbit hole, because the rabbit hole is just filled with rabbits, and 2 years from now, I think I'm going to have some decent second generation cutting machinery teachers. There are a couple of people that are coming along to the point where I think if they taught a little more of this stuff a little more publicly, it'd be fine. But right now, I don't have really anybody lined up to do actual teaching.
Right.
And even then, the cutting machinery is just an hour a day of very ordinary meditation with enough stabilizers that people don't go nuts to the point where I have to support them personally. So, is that me being efficient, or is that me just being very lazy and busy with other things?
You have priorities, other activities.
Well, it's what you want from your spiritual teachers, right? They should be distracted by careers and have no time at all for their students. Oh, fantastic. That's exactly what you want. Yeah. So there might be some second generation people there, but I'm just not in a position where we can point a lot of people at the meditation stuff that I've been teaching off and on, and then absorb them. There's just no capacity. So let's try.
So check out Cutting Through Spiritual Colonialism. Read the document if you like. And
have a look at that. Go find modern Buddhist teachers. It's all the same shit at the end of the day. Have a nice day.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Beautiful.